I mean, right? Let's just change the name as much as possible to throw you all off so you really don't know what's going on. Let's keep switching the identity to hide the people. Why don't we just keep renaming you? Are you Negro? Oh, no, you're not Negro. No, you're colored. No, you're not colored. You're African American. And this is what they name you. The slavers name you this. Because I know a white guy who grew up in South Africa. And he now lives in America. He is an African American, and more African American than most.
Now, the fact that Benjamin Franklin opposed slavery later in his life, after actually owning slaves earlier in his life, doesn't really answer the question of whether Franklin was racist, but anyone familiar with the writings of Benjamin Franklin would find it hard to argue he was not being racist in his essay titled Observations Concerning the Increase of Mankind, Peopling of Countries, etc., which ends with a paragraph that not only laments the swarthiness of the Spaniards, Italians, French, Russians, and Swedes, but ends with, quote, "Why increase the sons of Africa by planting them in America, where we have so fair an opportunity by excluding all blacks and tawnies of increasing the lovely white and red? But perhaps I am partial to the complexion of my country, for such kind of partiality is natural to mankind," unquote. Now, that's pretty much the dictionary definition of racism.
What was your initial response when you saw that Colin Kaepernick sat for the national anthem?
I'll be completely honest, my initial response was anger, you know?
I was angry and disappointed because I grew up a Niner fan and I was pulling for this guy. And now he just pissed on my flag. But then I just stopped making all these judgments and tried to listen to what he's talking about.
Specifically, is police brutality.
And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, I want to try to understand where he's coming from, at least somewhat, because I hadn't walked around in his shoes, but he hasn't walked around in my boots. You know what I mean? So I just wrote a letter and he got a hold of it.
He contacted you?
Yeah, he contacted me. He said he was inspired by it and he was wanting to sit down with me, you know, just have a discussion. First thing he said when we met was, hey, I just want you to know I appreciate your service more than anything.
I expressed to him, maybe there's a different way to demonstrate where you're showing more respect for those that lay down their lives for what that flag and anthem stands for. I suggested, kneeling, because people kneel to pray. We'll kneel in front of a fallen brother's grave.
To show respect. He said, I think that would be really powerful.
Colin Kaepernick choosing not to sit on the bench this time, but to take a knee.
The fact that he was willing to listen and go to a knee versus sitting, I thought was huge. That's an important step that he's taken. I think other people need to take a step too and maybe listen to him.
Cops are getting paid leave for killing people and not being held accountable. That's not right.
I respect those men and women in uniform, but the ones that aren't doing it the right way, we need to correct it. We need to fix it. He's right about that.
People of color have been targeted by police.
It is an issue, and we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go.
I think as a service member, it's more upsetting for me to come back from fighting for my country overseas to see how divided we are and how angry we are at each other.
Wouldn't you love to see one of these NFL owners say, get that son of a bitch off the field?
I'm more hurt by that than somebody sitting down during the anthem.
At this point, I'm just like, Mr. President, let's be presidential now and reach across to people that you don't agree with and you think are wrong and just say, you know what, let me hear you out.
If we have these real conversations that are uncomfortable for a lot of people, it's something that can unify this country.
And maybe we can come to some kind of agreement, solution, and understand that we're really not that different. We probably want the same things at the end of the day.
Hallelujah.
This is mind-boggling to me. They just cannot see the forest for the trees. They continue to fuel the flames that come from a lot of the fan base that has completely convoluted what the original message was in the first place. Somehow, and by the way, if you're wondering what, Google Sterling Brown today, because there's a video that's coming out later today with Milwaukee Bucks Sterling Brown. That's the exact reason why these guys feel the way they feel and have every right to feel the way they feel. And now you're going to once again put the onus on the players and, like Jalen said, make them be responsible for a penalty for the entire team because you don't want to open your minds, you don't want to listen, you want to pretend like you're having meetings and we're giving money to these causes and we're really here for you guys, we care. You don't care. And what you could do is get out in front of it and make the fans understand why this continues to happen instead of turning it into a protest of the flag, of the troops, of this country. It's never been about any of those things, but they want to continue to just fan those flames, fan the flames so the fans continue to talk out of their heinies, and we are still here. I love it. Good, do this and have all teams kneel, because what are you going to do? Just keep giving penalties back and forth, back and forth? This is going to be a great start to football game. I think we know very well how the NFL feels about this. So man up. Make the rule so we can all just be clear about it, because we know you don't want these guys kneeling. You don't want any sticky situations. You don't want to address the topic. You don't want to admit that we might actually have a problem in this country or many problems in this country. We get it. You don't want to talk about it. Then just say that. But every time you do one of these things, roll my eyes and it just becomes a bigger and bigger joke.
Taser, taser, taser! Where's your driver? Back up. You don't see the issue here? Hold on. Take your hands out of your pockets now. I got stuff in my hands. Taser, taser, taser. Bucks player. Sorry, I'm following the Bucks. I didn't recognize you. I do recognize your famous name. Where else do you know me? Oh, you've been to Mars, you've been to Venus, you've been to the moon.
Our department conducted an investigation into the incident, which revealed members acted inappropriately, and those members were recently disciplined.
So if there is ever an incident where one of our members makes a mistake, unnecessarily escalating a situation, I'm going to be honest and transparent.
Milwaukee police chief apologizing for the handling of Bucks guard Sterling Brown's arrest. Brown was tased and handcuffed during a January arrest for a parking violation. Stephen A., what's your reaction to this? To the arrest itself? Yeah.
I am not satisfied. That is my immediate reaction. The reason why I'm not satisfied is because the apology on the part of the Milwaukee police does not mean a damn thing to me at this particular moment in time, and here is why. I want names. Who are the officers who did this? What are their names? A. B, what specifically is the punishment? What do you mean they've been disciplined? How do we know that the disciplinary actions were satisfactory? I mean, it seems to be incredibly vague. The fact of the matter is that if this particular athlete had done something wrong, we would certainly know who he is. So why don't we know who the officers are that transgressed, and why don't we know what specifically the punishment is? Have they been suspended without pay? Do they still have their jobs? Has their pension been compromised? Have they been resigned to desk duty? Have they received a pay cut? Are they denied any promotions, et cetera, et cetera? I want names, and I want to know what the punishment is, okay? That's number one. Number two, I want to applaud Sterling Brown because here's where it gets really, really special for me. The fact is that he conducted himself the way on many, many occasions I've advocated many individuals within my very own community conduct themselves. He was very non-threatening. He didn't do anything wrong. There was nothing that he did that warranted what the officers did. He seemed to be cognizant of the fact that I better sit up here and mind my manners. Let me not allow my emotions to get the best of me, because this police officer, which ultimately turned into several police officers, seemed to be looking for an excuse to take me down, literally, figuratively, and otherwise. And while Black Americans throughout this country have every right to be emotional, have every right to be disgusted with the state of affairs that exists on the part of some police officers, not all police officers, on the part of just some, the reality is clear. You got to live another day. Be wise and be smart enough and recognize the fact that these are law enforcement officials that you're dealing with. And in the moment of conflict, the power lies with them. So it's incumbent upon you to keep your cool, don't react emotionally, and don't give them any reason with your movements, your temperament, or beyond to come at you with physical harm. Don't do it. Be mindful of it and guard against it. As wrong as they may be, the objective is not to be right. The objective is to survive first and then worry about being right later. I think Sterling Brown got that. I think his behavior exemplified that, which obviously really diminishes whatever level of justification the law enforcement officials may have had in doing what they did. I want names. I want to know who they are. And I want to know specifically what the punishment is. That apology doesn't mean a damn thing to me, because you're not telling me anything other than here's an apology, we're sorry, and then you could have just gone back doing what you've been doing. I want to know who the officers are immediately, right here on First Take on national television. I am calling for those officers' name, their titles, and I want to know exactly what the discipline is. Then maybe we will be satisfied.
They didn't abolish slavery until 1865. So what you're saying is because we've edited the national anthem to make it a clean version, that makes it okay.
Their blood was washed out of their foul footsteps pollution. No refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave, and the star-spangled banner in triumph they'll wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave.
It's just the fact that I edited it to make it acceptable for the general population. So now you look at what's going on in this country. So every black man that stands up and you put your hand over your heart when that Star-Spangled Banner is being sung, just know your heart, that place where your hand is the target of those police officers. And all those athletes and superstars that claim that they're for this, but we should stand up and support the flag, just hope that they recognize you when they pull you over.
And where is that band who so vauntingly swore that the havoc of war and the battle's confusion, a home and a country, should leave us no more? Their blood has washed out their foul footsteps pollution. No refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave, and the star-spangled banner in triumph doth wave o'er the land of the free. Some of those prairies they mentioned slaves in the Seminole songwriter Francis Scott Key. So maybe the free ones are the slave owners. Key represented as clients who incorporate the return of their slave property and the home of the brave. I'm looking at you, Tommy Smith, John Carlos, Jackie Robinson, and Colin Kaepernick.
Let's be clear that Donald Trump is just an exaggerated indication of what's happening in the country. He's the tip of the iceberg. He's not the iceberg itself. Right. And what Valerie Jarrett points our attention to, or directs our attention to, is this, Nicole. We could talk about the politics. We could talk about what's happening in the White House and folks who are complicit with it. But for a lot of black folk in this country, it seems as if, in the generality, white people have lost their damn minds. And we have to raise our children in the midst of this. We have to, when they go, those two black men in Starbucks, they were somebody's babies, even though they were grown men. That child that a police officer had hung up by his feet at the Waffle House, that's somebody's child. And so here we are in this environment where many of us in our past, in the histories of our families, have had people strung up from trees, have had to deal with legal segregation, have had to deal with ongoing insult and injury and harm, find ourselves in a historic moment right now where we have to worry about raising our kids. We have to worry about whether or not they will have opportunity. So we could talk about the politics, but there's something, and Steve, you get at this, you've touched on this. There's something deeply insidious that's borderline evil here. And it's not just simply Donald Trump. It's about the moral monsters that are running around this country and claiming it as their own.
First of all, let's just be very clear what happened here. The President of the United States decides to punish the entire team because some of the members didn't want to come. But he's punishing the members who didn't come. Hold on. He's punishing the entire team because some of the people didn't want to come. But the people he's punishing who didn't want to come didn't even do what he said they did because they didn't even kneel. He is so far down the rabbit hole of crazy on this. And what it comes down to is there is a resentment here against the NFL. And listen, nobody, by the way, I got to say this. Nobody was happier than me, by the way, when Philadelphia won, because Tom Shady Brady who deflated balls and is somehow a hero, gets to play, and Colin Kaepernick, who never did anything but try to stick up for civil rights, can't even get on the field. So when Tom Shady Brady went down, and a lot of African Americans were very happy when Philadelphia won. And there's a racial dynamic here, a racial dimension here about the fact that Philadelphia and Trump have this beef. But it's outrageous for him, outrageous for Trump to punish the whole team for something that nobody on the team even did.
All right, back to you, Urban, but let's get some context. First of all, to the extent that Brady is relevant here, he didn't show up to the White House. He had family issues the last time that they won. The team showed up. Some of them chose not to go. They didn't get this treatment. Why the distinction? And you called it pantsing. My friend, this is why I gave you the downward look on that. These are heavy issues.
Chris,
I get it. If you
Listen,
don't practice patriotism the way I like it, you're bad.
No, Chris.
You're a son of a bitch.
No, it isn't,
get out
Chris.
of the country.
Listen.
That is dangerous talk for a president in a country that's about tolerance.
Listen, I believe in the players' ability to protest, the right to protest, right? I think we need to get past the protests, make some progress. If I were the NFL Players Association, I'd be working to try to get some sort of real reforms rather than continuing the protests on the sidelines. I don't know what that gets you. Let me just say, pick up the point that Anthony made earlier on the show. The national anthem is about 2 minutes, about 120 seconds, depending on who sings it. If we can't, as a nation, agree to stand and be silent and think about that.
Come on.
Chris, listen.
The flag
stop.
is a symbol of freedom.
Hey, Chris, stop. Stop for a second. See this pit on my lapel here?
Yeah.
It's sort of Johnny Mac
Actually,
Soldier Fund.
We got the election countdown clock in front of it, but now I see it. What is it?
Somewhere in a pin. So Johnny Mac Soldiers Fund. I was at West Point today with my classmates, honoring my classmate John McHugh, who was killed by a terrorist bomber. You know what his coffin was wrapped in, Chris? The American flag. People take umbrage. They take
their sacrifice. God bless for them for protecting our freedoms.
Chris,
but
people take great
card.
umbrage.
That's jingoism.
No, it's not jingoism.
That's jingoism.
No, you believe patriotism is jingoism,
You are telling certain people.
Do you believe patriotism is jingoism?
No, of course not. But I'm saying when you pervert it, and when you say that if you're not the kind of patriot that I want you to be, that you're somehow inimical to the cause here. No. And that's dangerous stuff.
I think what the president
Van Jones,
saying,
hold on a second. We heard you on this one.
Okay.
Let's bounce it back.
Okay.
Van, listen. The reason I wanted to do this tonight is it ain't about football. Okay? And it's not about the flag. This started as a social protest when they started to kneel. Nobody's ever said I'm anti-flag. They said it is hard for me to honor the flag right now and honor our country when there are issues I'm so against that are against what this country is about. That's where it started. It was never a protest to the flag, but that's what Trump has made it, and his allies, like our friend on the show right now. Is that fair?
It's not fair, and I tell you, I'm a ninth-generation American, Chris. A ninth-generation American. I'm the first person in my family that was born with all my rights recognized by this government. My father was a veteran. My family members have served in this country. I don't need anybody to tell me what this flag means and what it represents. People in my family, people who look like me, have put blood in the ground, have put martyrs in the dirt in this country to have it be liberty and justice for all. And it is beyond insulting for people to lecture us about patriotism. We've done more.
Hey, Van,
no, you had your chance.
Go ahead.
Listen, there is a level of patronizing, not from you, but from this White House and from others, that somehow African Americans are ungrateful, that we somehow don't know what this country is about. We have fought in every war. We have sacrificed more for that Constitution than most people. And if this man, Colin Kaepernick, can't kneel because of veteran. You're talking about veterans. It was a veteran that told them to kneel. He was just sitting on his butt, and the veteran said that was wrong. And Colin Kaepernick learned, and Colin Kaepernick tried to grow, and Colin Kaepernick tried to do what they told him to do, and he still don't have a job. And it's wrong. And if you can't say it's wrong, then there's something wrong with you.
Van, so listen, wouldn't it be better if Colin Kaepernick were able to get the owners and get the police and get out in the community and see, right? Wouldn't it be better if all those players took all that energy and put it to progress?
Yeah, hold on. Let's get a counterpoint. Go ahead. This is, and by the way, first of all, with everything that's going on in this country right now, I like how this conversation's going. You're being reasonable, you're making your points, and I like it. Van, continue.
But here, Brother Urban, as you get called on this show all the time, because we do love you and we do respect you. But one thing that has been left out of the right-wing media coverage is that Colin Kaepernick has put millions of dollars and challenged other celebrities to put millions of dollars into the neighborhoods. He's not just talking the walk, he's walking the walk. Why can't that be acknowledged and
Why don't we
celebrated?
talk about that?
I would love to talk about it, but here's the thing.
Why won't the president talk about it?
You got a president of the United States.
And listen, look, I think it's important to keep, who we're talking about and who we're not. Dave, I know that you agree with a lot of what Van is saying.
No, listen,
I know that as a veteran and somebody who respects the freedoms of this country, you know we're all about tolerance. We're all about letting people express the way that they want. That's why I'm worried about this.
But Chris, as a lawyer,
because that's not what the president's doing.
There are restrictions on speech in lots of instances, right? I'm not saying this is one of them.
And the NFL has their right to say how their employees do what they do, and they're figuring that out. But that's not what the president's playing at here.
Listen,
it's not what he's playing at. He's making it about these guys don't respect the flag. He calls them sons of bitches. He says they shouldn't be in the country. Who is they?
Listen,
who is they that he's talking about? This is not uniting. He was supposed to be a uniter. You told me he would be a uniter during the campaign.
I never said he was a uniter. That wasn't me.
Oh, it was you. You are not easy to mistake, my friend. Head shape alone. I'll never forget who you are.
If you are a person of color, a black man living in America, then you already know that you have been lied to about a lot of things. What you probably don't know is that you have been sorely lied to about almost everything. Everything that you hear and that you read about yourself, about your history, you need to question because it is probably not true. Why? Well, location, location, location. It's one of the oldest tricks in the book. If they can lie to us about where we come from, then we will not know where we are supposed to go. We will not know what we are supposed to do. What we are taught in school is that all the black men and women in the Americas were brought over here by the Europeans. That is one of the biggest lies that is out there today. And they use that lie in order to hide the fact that most of us were here before them. And that most of the people of color here in the Americas can trace their ancestors to their land, to the Americas, in some cases up to 1600 or over 2000 years before the Europeans came here. But why were we lied to? Again, it's about the location. If you don't know that you are from this land, then you will not be as willing to fight for it. You will not be as willing to die and to shed blood for it. If anything, I'm sure they have told us before, you should go back to Africa because that is where you come from. Well, the Europeans have lied to us here in the Americas over and over and over again. But it is not something new, because if you follow the Bible, you know that a lot of the nations of Europe are simply children of the Chaldeans, children of the Babylonians, children of the Canaanites that was on the land that Israel went to. And so the same things that they used to do back then is the same things that they are doing today. I'm not talking about the regular person of Europe. I'm talking about the elite. I'm talking about the bankers, the multinational corporations, the bloodlines that run and govern Europe and by extension, much of the rest of the world. Well, this trick that they're using that has to do with location, it's something that they've been using for generations. In fact, for a very long time. Even before Europe came to power, the same trick was being used by the Assyrians. When Israel fell about 720 BC, the populations of Israel was deported. Most of the cities, their populations were taken to a land outside of Israel, to a land in the Assyrian Empire. They would be relocated. And what the Assyrians did is that they brought people from other cities in other parts of the Assyrian Empire, and they brought those people into Israel, into the cities of Israel. And so, in that way, the people that they brought into Israel would not be tied to the land. They would not be willing to fight as hard for the land. They would know that they come from someplace else. If anything, they would seek to return. If anything, they would not want to shed as much blood to stay on that land because they know they don't really belong there. In the same way, the Assyrians hope that the populations of the children of Israel that they relocated to another part of the empire, those populations would not be willing to die and to shed blood, knowing that it is not their land that they are fighting for. The same thing happened to the southern kingdom of Judah. About 120 years later, the Babylonians with Nebuchadnezzar came and they destroyed Judah. And they took those populations and they relocated them as well. And they, just like the Assyrians before them and other empires before the Assyrians, they transplanted other populations into Judah. That way, the new populations that are in the southern kingdom would not be as willing to fight to overthrow the Babylonians. They also encouraged the children of Edom at that time to go into Israel. And that's why we find there's a lot of corruption today in the way we have come to accept things, because a lot of those people, a lot of the children of Edom that went into Jerusalem had an effect in the way we see the name of our Father today. They're the ones who eventually made it almost illegal to say the name of our Father. Now, why did the Babylonians do this? Again, they wanted a population in place that would not present as many problems. A population in place that would be more submissive and more obedient because they are not tied to the land. The same trick is being used by the children of the Babylonians today, by the Neo-Babylonians, by the European empires. The same trick is used today. All over Africa, everybody's history has been rewritten because of European domination. Likewise, in the America, our history has been rewritten. We are told that we do not have any ties to the land. We are told that all of us came from Africa, but that is a lie. At least they are not the ones to have brought us over. We came, in some cases, 1,600 years or more, up to 2,100 years before Columbus. We came and settled the Americas. And so when the Europeans came all over North and South America, they found people of all color, but primarily they found people of color. And they found a lot of black men and they found a lot of brown men, men who today they want to call Native Americans. But what they have done is they have cleverly stereotyped one particular look that the Native Americans have, to say that if you don't look this way, you are not a Native American. Again, that's a lie. And the reason that we are taught that in our schools, generation after generation after generation, is so that we will not feel any ties to the land, so that we will not know that we were born in America for generations and generations and generations before the Europeans came. That way we will not be willing to fight for the land. We will not be willing to call unto our king, the king of Israel, to deliver the land to us. We will not be willing to ask our father for help in taking back our land. If anything, we should go back to Africa. Well, we know that there was a slave trade. We know that a lot of Africans were brought over by the Europeans into the Americas. But the truth is, the vast, vast majority of us, most of our bloodline was here before the Europeans came. Our history was rewritten. All of the early slaves were Native Americans. They were people my complexion, people darker, people lighter, and they were enslaved by Europe. And only after Europe took a population that was most likely over 2 billion people in North and South America combined, after they had reduced and decimated that population completely, only then did they begin to bring in our brothers and our sisters who were living along the coast of Africa into the Americas. That's why there's a verse in the Bible that says, though our people be replenished from the east. Replenished from the east is along the western coast of Africa, across the Atlantic, replenishing the children of Israel that were already here in the Americas. Now, how did we get here? Well, Israel was destroyed 720 years before Christ. King Solomon was here a good 250 years before that. He was in ancient Israel, and he most likely visited the New World, visited the Americas himself. But we know for certain that he used to send expeditions that lasted 3 years, expeditions by ship. He used to pack up a few ships with men and goods, and they would go around South Africa. That means that they would leave out of a port in Judah, and that port, I believe, is called, what is it? Ezion Geber. You can check the proper name out. But Solomon sent expeditions out, and those expeditions took 3 years for their trip to be completed. Why? That's because those ships left out of a port called Ezion Geber in the Red Sea, and it would go down the eastern coast of Africa, around South Africa, and into the Americas, Brazil, and then the islands. And then from there, it would sail northward through the Straits of Gibraltar into the Mediterranean Sea and back into Israel. That trip, we learned, took 3 years. That's where he went to a land called Ophir for gold. That gold is in the Americas. Solomon was coming to the Americas even 1,000 years before Christ. And he was not the first. The ancient Canaanites, the Phoenicians, also came to the Americas, and the Egyptians as well. they left pyramids all across the Americas, and their mark here is well known. They came even before Solomon, and then when Israel was destroyed, those that could, those among Israel that knew that the slow marching armies of the Assyrians were coming, they got on ships and they left, knowing that they can make it to a land that would be far away from the Assyrians. And when Nebuchadnezzar came to destroy Judah, the children of Judah also remembered that King Solomon used to go to a faraway land. And they too, those that could, got on ships heading for that land. And whenever they got on ships to go to a distant land, they very often would make stops along the coastline. And as they would make stops, sometimes they would leave people behind. They would leave colonies behind. And these colonies would grow. 10 became 100, 100 became 1,000, 1,000 into millions and into nations. And so you have nations of the children of Israel that is along all the coastlines, probably of the world, certainly of Asia, the coastlines of Africa, and into the Americas. And that's why prophecy was able to be fulfilled, because our Father said that the children of Israel would be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered. Indeed, he did not mean for all of us to stay in little Israel, but to populate the entire world so that our numbers could become that plentiful. And so what happened is that a lot of the members of Israel that left Israel were determined to go to a place where they can call their own. And a lot of them came to America. But you will never learn that or hear about that in a history book. And the reason for that is Europe feel that they have to disassociate you from the land. Location, location, location. If you knew that you were here hundreds of years before the Europeans, certainly this is more your land than it is the land of the Europeans. Certainly you would want to fight and to die for it. And so this must be hidden. And Europe had to use a number of lies to keep it hidden. And so they lied to us and say that they were trying to reach India, or that they were trying to reach the Mongolian Empire. Genghis Khan and the Mongols had ravaged much of Eastern Europe around that time. And so they would not have been looking for Genghis Khan. He probably would have destroyed them. And if they were looking for Indians, why is it that Columbus took two interpreters, an Arabian, an interpreter of Arab, and a Hebrew interpreter? So the two people that he expected to find in the Americas, well, the languages he expected to find in the Americas included the Arab languages, and it included Hebrew. And so they were not looking for India. They were not looking for the Mongolian Empire. They knew they were coming to new continents, to new lands, to them anyway, and they knew that these people could not defend themselves and that they would be easy pickings. Another lie is that Europe was the first people to bring Africans into North and South America, which doesn't make any sense at all. If you look at the globe or any map, you see that Africa is separated from the Americas by the Atlantic Ocean. And if Columbus got lost while he was trying to go under South Africa and he got blown into the Americas, why wouldn't other ships leaving the western coast of Africa, why wouldn't they be blown into the Americas as well? In fact, what Columbus found is many nations of Africa were already coming to the Americas, some of them having themselves stayed, establishing families and colonies in the Americas well before the Europeans came. And that trade also was very common between the two continents. The difference is that most of the nations of the western coast of Africa that were coming over to the Americas, they were not belligerent nations. They were not warlike nations. Most of them were also children of Israel, and most of them lived in the manner that indigenous peoples all over the world live, and that is in peace and in harmony with their neighbors and with nature. And so when they were coming to the Americas, they did not come to pillage, they did not come to destroy, they did not come to spoil. That did not happen until the arrival of Columbus. Now, in the words of Columbus himself, he's the first place that he landed and brought his men over to was the island of Haiti. And in Columbus's own words, he said that the Manicangos called Haiti, called the island Cipango. So Columbus said that the Manicango being a nation in Africa at the time, the Manicangos called the island Cipango. Now it's either that the Manicangos were the ones that told them about it, because surely Columbus was told about it by one of the nations of Africa, probably the Moors, or there was a large settlement of Africans in the island of Haiti when he got here, so much so that they gave it their own name, Cipango. And the other name that the Indians had for the island of Haiti is Quisqueya. Now, Columbus, in his own words, said that he was looking, that he had found a lot of gold. We know that's what he was looking for, gold. And even today, to the elite of Europe, gold is their God. Gold is what they live for. Gold is what they die for. Gold is what they worship. Now, let's look at the words of Christopher Columbus himself. Let's see what he had to say when he spoke about the island that he called Hispaniola, the island that is Haiti. This is what Columbus wrote to the king and queen of Spain. Gold is the most precious of all commodities. Columbus lays everything out very clearly. Again, he wrote that gold is the most precious of all commodities. Solomon bought all of it, gold, precious stones, and silver, but your majesties need only to send to seek them, to have them at your pleasure. So Columbus wrote, and he said that Solomon had to trade for the gold. He had to pay for the gold. But all that the king and queen of Spain had to do was but send for them. Why? Because his intention is to take them by force. His intention is to force the Native Americans, our fathers, to die in the gold mines for the gold so that he can send it back to Europe. And he already knew that we had no way of defending ourselves. I continue. David, in his will, left 3,000 quintals of Indian gold to Solomon to assist in building the temple. And according to Josephus, it came from these lands. So Columbus not only found a lot of gold. This is the land of Ophir. The Bible says the gold is good. This is also the land of Havilah. Columbus said that these are the lands that Solomon got his gold from. Columbus said that the temple that David built, he added that gold to, he used that gold to make the temple pretty. Columbus continues. Jerusalem and Mount Zion are to be rebuilt by the hands of Christians, as God has declared by the mouth of his prophet in the 14th Psalm. The Abbe Joachim said that he who should do this was to come from Spain. Columbus thought that that was himself. Now, Columbus believed that Haiti is the site of Mount Zion, that Haiti is the site of Jerusalem. Let me continue. This is what he had to say about Haiti. He wrote, in Hispaniola, there are mountains of very great size and beauty. The rivers surpass anything that would be believed by one who had not seen it. None of them, as I have already said, are possessed of any iron, neither have they weapons. They are very simple and honest and exceedingly liberal with all they have, none of them refusing anything he may possess when he is asked for it, but, on the contrary, inviting us to ask them. They exhibit great love toward all others in preference to themselves. They also give objects of great value for trifles, and content themselves with very little or nothing in return. Each of these islands has a great number of canoes. I saw some of these canoes that held as many as 78 rowers. In all these lands, there is no difference of physiognomy, of manners, or of language, but they all clearly understand each other. What Columbus said is that he found a nation of people living in peace. He found that all the islands of the Caribbean were one people. Those people are called the Taino. He said that these people have no iron and no weapons. That's why he felt so comfortable that conquering the Americas would be very, very easy. And he wrote that these people were living the way that our Father wants us to live today. He said they practice no kind of idolatry, but have a firm belief that all strength and power and indeed all good things are in heaven. These are the words of Columbus. These are the people, our fathers and our mothers, us who are living in all of the Americas today. This is what Columbus said about us. This is what he is saying about us. And these words about how we were living at the time, and also about how densely populated that the Americas was at the time, these words were echoed by Bartolomé de las Casas, by James Adair, by Elias Boudinot. All these men wrote what they saw and what they knew to be true at the time. And all of them wrote that there is no doubt in their minds that the nations in the Americas are children of Israel. They wrote that these nations all sing hallelujah, and these nations all live in the manner that the Hebrews, that the children of Jacob were living in the Bible, in the ancient days. And he said they even had cities of refuge, just like in the Bible. He said that they were their garments with fringes, just like in the Bible. He said that they will not even bow themselves to anybody or any image. They practice no idolatry, just like the children of Israel were taught by Moses. And so it became very important to the Europeans to hide all of this from us, because they do not want you to fight for the land. They do not want you to know that you were here before they came. Sure, some of our brothers and sisters came along the coastline of Africa, but the numbers are small in comparison to the great majority of us who were here before the Europeans came. And now, we have been mixed, but we are mixed with our brothers. Now, you would expect that Haiti and the nation, the people that Columbus met in all of the islands that he was talking about, you would expect that if they are children of Jacob, that you would find some type of evidence in that, in their names, in the names of their cities, in the names of their rivers and of their mountains. And indeed, that is the case. In much the same way that the other nations of the world, as their people move from land to land, as they colonize and take over places, they bring with them the names of their cities, the names of their rivers, the names of their leaders, follow them, of their founding fathers, follow them into the new place that they are moving into. We see that with the recent movement of the Europeans. You have England in the old world, in Europe, and you have New England in the New World, in the Americas. You have York in England. You have New York in the New World, in the Americas. The same way you have Judah and Israel, Ephraim, Joseph, and Manasseh in the old world, in ancient Israel. And as they move across the face of the globe, they would carry the names of their fathers and the names of their leaders and of their Father who is in heaven as well. And that's what we find in Haiti. That's what we find in the Taino people, who are the fathers of the people who are in Haiti today. And not just in Haiti, but also in Puerto Rico, in Cuba, in Trinidad, in Jamaica. We were all one people. What happened is that the Europeans went into the islands, and now Jamaica speaks English, Haiti speaks Creole and French, and Puerto Rico speaks English and Spanish. It is because the Europeans came and split the people, the islands, among themselves. But before they came, we were all one people, and we were called the Taino. And the word Taino itself means good. The reason why Taino means good, I don't know, but they certainly behave that way. They and that's why they were known to all the other nations in the Americas, that Taino means good, and they were called the good people. That's because the island of Haiti, which was the center of the Taino people at the time, that island had a lot of mighty kingdoms, and in each of these kingdoms, the people were taught to live the way that God wanted us to live, and they accepted their neighbors. When somebody came from Africa to visit, or when somebody came from Europe, like Columbus did, to visit, they opened all their doors to Columbus. They took him in, they fed him, they brought him materials to repair his ship. They gave him everything that he wanted, except he turned around and put them into slavery. He handed them over to his European masters, who had the same evil intentions that he did. That is, to steal the gold and the riches of the land, and then eventually to take the land itself, which is what they've done in most of the Americas. And so what we find is that when he came to the Americas, he would have been confronted with a lot of things that showed him that these are the people of the book, that these are descendants of Israel. And that's exactly what he found.
1860, David Wyrick. He's a guy who surveyed the Newark earthworks. He was digging into a mound near those earthworks, and he found a wooden coffin made of oak. They opened up the coffin and found a skeleton of a man holding a little box. It was about 8.10 inches in size. The box had been cemented shut here. This, by the way, is sitting in Ohio. Well, he opened up the box and he found a little man inside, a little black stone. They took it to scholars and they looked at it. The man seems to be carrying something, and there's writing here at first they couldn't recognize. The writing is, they thought in 1860, some sort of Hebrew. Well, finally, about 20 years later, they found some rabbis living in the area, and the rabbis looked at that and they could read it. They said it was an old kind of block Hebrew, and it was a rendition of the 10 Commandments. Now, this is another piece. Block Hebrew, they said they'd never seen anything like it. Mainstream archaeologists at the time called this a hoax. But then in 1900, or just about after 1900, in Israel, they found the same block-style Hebrew writing. Mainstream archaeologists still dismissed the findings. They found it in Israel, and they found it in Ohio. But there was another stone that they found that they couldn't argue. This is the Bat Creek stone. It was found during the course of an official Smithsonian evacuation. The Smithsonian didn't understand the meaning of the writing on the stone. They thought it was Cherokee, since it came from Cherokee country. They didn't realize that it's actually Hebrew. They had published this originally upside down. They threw it in a box at the bottom of the Smithsonian, put it in the basement. Many years later, a scholar took it out of the box, looked at it, and went, oh my gosh, it's upside down. It's Phoenician, ancient Hebrew. So what's going on here? What is that about? Where is that history?
Brought here by Hebrew people in search of a new promised land. I want to know if this stone, inscribed with the 10 Commandments, might have been kept inside the ark, or was it left behind as a clue that one of the Bible's most sacred artifacts is right here in the United States?
This is the Decalogue stone with the 10 Commandments written on it on all sides of it. And this is a stone box that the Decalogue was found in.
Okay.
So when it was found, it was enclosed in this box, and you couldn't even see the stone inside. The box is carved out inside exactly to fit the Decalogue stone.
Well, who's that guy?
Well, this figure here on the front that's wearing a robe and a turban and holding either tablets or a breastplate, and over his head in these Hebrew letters it says Moshe or Moses.
Oh.
So must be Moses.
Okay, that's Moses, all right.
Who delivered the 10 Commandments.
10 Commandments, okay. It seems to pass the scrutiny of the skeptics as far as the Hebrew text in the language, so now I'd like to try to add some evidence to this whole discussion. This thing is polished after it was carved. It's scratched like I would expect. Well, it fits snug.
So the box in itself took an awful lot of work. I mean, if it was really a forgery, you wouldn't go to all that much trouble to make a box for it. So I think that speaks to its authenticity, that someone really this was very important to someone.
This is a lot of work, and it's polished. It's got the detailing of the grooves. It wasn't made, as far as I can tell, from modern machinery. Geologically, I don't see any problems here that would make these things obvious hoaxes. So the skeptics have rejected this.
Well, that's been a factor, but Hebrew is an odd thing to find here.
The fact that it's odd doesn't mean that it's not genuine. What it boils down to is really the problem with these artifacts is that the academics don't like them because they don't fit the paradigm. And unfortunately for them, you can't dismiss things simply because you don't like them.
Right.
And so the evidence to me seems clear. There's no reason not to accept these as genuine, legitimate artifacts.
So I'm like you guys, I celebrate American history, which is our history, every month out the year. And I hope that for parents and kids that go home, now we have the internet, now we have tools at our hand. And no, you aren't being taught Black American history in schools, but now we can still go out and find that history. It's not like when we grew up and maybe it was buried someplace in the encyclopedia. All you gotta do is go type in some words and you can get it right now and understand where you've come from and how special you are.
Can I just end with this one thing? These four brothers sitting here, we didn't all come from Africa. And there was a there was a country before 1492, and our history goes way beyond 1492. So you can't start us at 1492. We were always here.
That's history only from us players. No, we love you guys. Happy American History Month. We back with some more players only. Only players, baby.
Tonight we're going to report a story that's almost 80 years old, but it will come as news to most Americans as, frankly, it did to us. This country's most violent race riot didn't happen in Newark or Watts or Detroit. It happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma in June of 1921. For decades, city officials covered it up. The history books barely mentioned it, and people, white people that is, hardly ever talked about Tulsa burning. But all that's changing now. The state commission has begun investigating the riot and is already raising tough questions about what today's citizens owe yesterday's victims. And it's revived memories for George Monroe of a night 78 years ago when his mother saw 4 white men walking up to their house carrying torches.
Our mother told us to get up under the bed, and we got up under the bed. We could just see just their feet. They came in and set fire to the curtains, and one stepped on my fingers, and my sister put her hand over my mouth to be sure to stop me, because she could tell I was fixing to holler because it hurt.
Monroe escaped with some sore fingers. His home and the rest of Tulsa's black neighborhood, called Greenwood, was burning. Before the riot, 10,000 blacks lived in Greenwood, did business there, prospered there. In fact, Greenwood was one of the nation's most vibrant black communities. But children quickly learned that they lived in a different world from whites.
The tracks was a dividing line. Now, every Sunday, we would climb on top of the coal car and throw enough coal on the side of, on our side, and I guess they did the same thing, but every Sunday we had a good coal fight. We would throw at them and they would throw at us.
Like a kid's little riot?
That's a good description of it, like a kid's riot. That's right.
The kids, of course, learned from the adults.
There was total segregation, wasn't there?
Oh, that was the wonder of it all. After Oklahoma became a state, The first law passed by the Oklahoma legislature was Senate Bill 1 that completely segregated the state.
Don Ross represents Greenwood today in the state legislature. He's one of the prime movers behind the campaign to uncover Tulsa's dirty little secret.
How old were you when you heard about the riot of 1921?
I was 15 and in high school.
You hadn't heard about it until you were 15?
Never heard, didn't believe it.
What Ross heard then is that on the morning of May 30th, a young black man got into the elevator of a building downtown, and that the elevator operator, a 17-year-old white girl, screamed.
The Tulsa Tribune, which was the afternoon daily newspaper, printed a fantastic write-up of this event. They had a front-page story that said, "Nab Negro for attacking girl." Within the next hour, there's lynch talk on the streets of Tulsa.
Historian Scott Ellsworth has been studying the Tulsa riot for 20 years. It's not just an academic quest for Ellsworth. He was born and raised in Tulsa.
So the word of a lynching was out in the streets, whites started gathering. How were blacks reacting?
Great concern. I mean, everybody knew what was about to happen.
Many of Tulsa's blacks were veterans of the First World War and armed. A group went to the courthouse and offered to help defend the jail and its black prisoner. The sheriff told them to go home.
And as they're leaving, a white man goes up to a tall black vet and says, "Where you going with that gun, nigger?" And the vet says, "I'm going to use it if I have to." The white man says, "Like hell you are, give it to me." A struggle, shot goes off. The worst riot in American history begins.
Just about then, as dusk was settling in, Venice Sims was getting ready for her high school prom.
Had a beautiful dress, shoes, everything new. And even some borrowed pearls. The seamstress had let me have her borrowed pearls to wear. Everything.
Do you have a boyfriend?
Sure. Secretly. My daddy didn't allow us to court. But I had one.
And then you're supposed to go to the prom, and what happens?
Well, that's when the riot, that's when it started. And that's when the bullets started falling.
Miss Sims, her family, and many Greenwood residents got out of town during the night. Others stayed and fought, but by dawn, they were overwhelmed.
Right before dawn, as many as 10,000 whites descended upon Black Tulsa.
Opening fire?
Opening fire. There was a block-by-block battle throughout the black community. They would force the occupants of a house out. If people resisted, they were murdered on the spot. The homes were looted, and then they were set fire to.
Did the white authorities do anything to try to prevent this or control it?
They don't. They spend most of their time arresting blacks and disarming blacks, preventing them from defending their homes and businesses, taking them to these internment centers around town.
Sounds like a precursor of ethnic cleansing.
Absolutely.
Kenny Booker's father hid his wife and 5 children in the attic just before armed whites came to the front door.
We could hear him from the attic talking to him, said, "Nigga, do you have a gun?" I think he said no. And he said, "Don't set my house on fire, please." He didn't tell him why, but after he left, not long after he left, they set it on fire, and we had to scramble down in a hurry. And his sister, that's 6 years old, she said, "Is the world on fire, Kenny?" I said, "I don't know, but we in trouble, deep trouble."
The trouble came from the air, too. Investigators say some of the fires you see in this rare footage of the riot were caused by whites dropping explosives from World War I vintage planes flying over Greenwood. The flames destroyed almost every home and business in Greenwood, 35 square blocks in all.
We didn't have no home. Everything was burned. All over there where we live, just burned down to the ground.
Late in the day, martial law was declared and National Guard troops patrolled the streets. The dead were everywhere, the bodies lying where they fell. Photographers turned some of their grisly pictures into souvenir postcards. Most of the dead were buried quickly in unmarked graves around town, but some apparently were laid to rest here in Tulsa's Oak Lawn Cemetery in this anonymous section reserved for paupers. There were no funerals. The authorities outlawed funerals. There were no coffins, no headstones, no records of the burials. but a 10-year-old boy saw it all. Clyde Eddy walked by the cemetery with a friend, saw some men digging and some big wooden crates.
And we went in, naturally, and walked up to the first one and raised the lid up. There were 3 bodies of black men in it, just thrown in there. And we went over to another crate, a larger crate, and raised the lid on it. And there was 4 bodies in this one. And there was, let's see, there's either 4 or 5 more boxes scattered around. And about that time, one of the men saw us, and he run us out.
The newspapers didn't think the mass graves deserved many headlines, and the White City Fathers, proud of their booming oil town, wanted to bury the story along with the bodies. The official version, typos and all, came in a National Guard report. It said there were 35 dead, 9 whites and 26 blacks. But that number just keeps on rising.
We think now that something like 300 people were killed in this.
How many people were left homeless by the riot?
Oh my gosh, 10,000 people were left homeless by the riot.
How many of those were white?
None.
The survivors lived in tents and shacks which they built themselves.
My brother was 14 at the time, and he helped my father install wood. It was raining, as I can remember, it rain. Seemed like it was rain, and we had a wooden floor in our tent. We were lucky to have that.
But Tulsa's whites gave them something. Promises.
Now, in fact, after the riot, the city's white establishment said it was going to rebuild Greenwood. What happened?
They lied. Not a dime. They proceeded to pass a fire ordinance that said, in effect, that you cannot build on property that had been burned. They wanted to starve blacks out of the land. They made it known to all philanthropic groups, we don't want your money. We would take care of our own. And there would be no problem. They spoke. They lied.
Courts and insurance companies paid some damage claims filed by whites. All black claims were rejected. A grand jury filed no charges against whites. 57 blacks were indicted for rioting. And in fact, they'd put up one hell of a fight.
In my community, among those survivors, they won the riot. They won it. You know, only till they brought airplanes in and dropped bombs and firebombs and brought the National Guard in could they subdue my people. That's the view from the black community, that airplanes and National Guard saved them white folks. We were winning.
For Ross, setting up a legislative commission to study the riot was a way of keeping that pride alive. Eddie Faye Gates is one of the members.
It said history is the lie agreed upon. Well, somebody agreed not to tell the story of the riot in Tulsa. At first, there was denial, you know. It didn't happen. It wasn't that bad. Now, Tulsa and Oklahoma's way past the denial stage.
The commission is looking for the truth by looking for the dead. But Greenwood is looking for more than just some unmarked graves.
Somebody has to pay when they do wrong. If you don't, if there's no penalty for wrongdoing, there's no incentive for societies to do the right thing.
Who should get reparations, the 60 or 70 survivors or the descendants of all the people who were wronged at the time?
My wish list, which I don't think we'll ever get, would be that there would be adequate monetary payments to survivors, the living survivors. For the descendants, maybe scholarships for the college-age children of these descendants.
The sons don't pay for the sins of the fathers. They pay for only their own sins.
State Representative Bill Graves opposed setting up the commission and thinks Tulsa should put the past where he says it belongs, in the past.
The statute of limitations is run on the people here involved that were injured.
What would you say to one of the survivors who would say to you, lost my home, lost everything my family had worked for?
I'd have to tell them that I didn't think they have any right to money from the legislature. This is a tragic thing that happened to them. Tragic things happen to other people that seems unjust to us, yet we have to live with them.
What do you think should come out of this? A memorial?
I have no problem with a memorial. That These people should be, I think, remembered and honored for what they had to go through.
Don Ross says he doesn't need a memorial. He's already got one. His anger.
I feel strongly, if I'm ever satisfied with whatever we do, that I will let down some people who educated me in my life and who died angry. I am their living memorial. My anger is.
But George Monroe, the kid with the sore fingers, has a longer view about reparations, about monuments, and about everything that's happened and not happened in Tulsa since that dark day in 1921.
It's still here, even today in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Segregation is still here. It's still here. But it's loosening up a little bit now.
So 75 years after the riot, segregation is loosening up a bit.
A bit. That's a good description, just exactly what you said. A bit.
The migration to where we are now perhaps took thousands of years, I'm not sure, but it took a long time for our people to get here.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Wait, first of all.
They don't look like Indians to me, and they don't look like Indians to Indians, and a lot of people are laughing at it.
Every time they would make a stop, they would put the sacred pole in the ground. But the next day, as an example, this pole would lean towards the direction that the people are supposed to go. The pole would give them direction, and the people would march again. And people brought everything with them, including the bones of the ancestors. And people brought everything with them, including the bones of the ancestors. And the feeling, the understanding that I get from that is that they would never return to their place of origin as far as the migration is concerned. When they reached what we now know as Mississippi River, they planted a pole in the ground. It's our understanding that a storm came, biblical proportions, and yet the next day this pole stood straight up. And since that time, we've always been where we are today, our ancestral homeland in Mississippi. Tabitit abachikiyahe. Our people, when they built the mounds, they put this sacred pole down, and the spirit gave them this song, and as long as they sang the song, the sacred pole would always stand straight towards the heaven.
For Native Americans, some might say the road to equality in the U.S. has been one of the toughest battles in its past. Historically, the relationship between Native Americans and the white European settlers has shifted between paternalistic to oppressive. Rights were trampled, land was taken, and they were told to assimilate, supposedly to protect Indian property rights. Even though Native Americans had preceded Americans on U.S. soil, by the mid-1920s, still only about 2/3 of Native Americans were considered U.S. citizens. Some, through marriage, military service, or allotments from the Dawes Act of 1887, were. But in order to continue to assimilate them into white America, while allowing them to maintain their tribal traditions, President Calvin Coolidge passed the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924 on June 2nd, granting citizenship to all Native Americans born in the U.S. But even then, Native Americans would continue to battle for their rights. Some states continued to deny them. But their battle was won when New Mexico finally granted citizenship in 1962.
When we look at social determinants of health for American Indian people, a lot of that can be traced to federal policy and how the tribes have been treated historically. And unfortunately, I think there are many people in this country who do not understand the history of federal-tribal relations. And there were periods of policy for the federal government that were really bad for the tribal communities. There's a period of removal, for example, where tribes were moved from their ancestral homelands to other areas. And if you uproot entire cultures and place them in a foreign land, essentially, that's going to have an impact on health. It's going to have an impact on other social factors, including self-identity and sense of disempowerment, that we can't even live where my parents lived, my grandparents lived.
What you doing?
Where hundreds of generations before me lived.
Where hundreds of generations before me lived.
That has an impact on people's self-esteem and health-related behaviors. They're also trying to assimilate people and have them move to urban settings. And when this policy was first implemented, they were taking people from traditional native cultures and placing them in large cities where they faced all kinds of discrimination. There was also a period of termination when the federal government essentially wanted to terminate tribes' status and try to essentially say they don't exist because they want them to just assimilate. Recently, there is a trend toward a period of self-determination where the federal government is trying to work with tribal communities so that they can determine their own successes, take over programs, for example, Indian Health Service programs, and have more self-determination and local control of the types of programs that they operate. But when you look at this from a historical perspective, and when we think about the different periods of types of federal policy toward American Indians, there's been a long history of significant social injustice and violation of civil rights, and in many ways, movement toward genocide of the original inhabitants of this land. And of course that has an impact on health, and it has an impact on self-identity, and it has an impact on one's sense of hope for the future. So when we think of social determinants of health, those federal policies that were so destructive to tribal nations have a direct impact on behavior at the individual level. And that's why we've seen so much despair historically.